Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Humaira. So glad to have you. Everyone who's tuning in, I just want to let you know how fortunate we are and to have such a special and honored guest with us today, someone who I've been learning so much from in the last couple of months. And I'm so excited to have this conversation and be able to glean some of the wisdom and insights that she has to share and talk about her story, her work, all the amazing and beautiful things she's done and is doing today. And so, first of all, Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Humaira. Welcome. So glad to have you on the Ancient Futures
Walaikum
podcast.
assalam. Thank you, Mazin, for having me.
So good to have you. And I wanted to just introduce you a little bit and talk a little bit about who you are and what you've done. And then if I miss anything, because there's always going to be more, you can please add it. But so Dr. Humaira Shahid is a human rights activist, a journalist, Assembly of the Punjab parliamentarian. So the Punjab district of, province of Pakistan. She was actually the first private member who was on the parliament, which is quite amazing. Harvard University Committee of Human Rights Fellow, a Muslim, a mystic, a mother. You know, you've done some very deep work and research regarding violence against women, but you also have worked with agricultural workers and their rights. You were behind the banning of a predatory money lending scheme that was resulting in, to my understanding, actually, people who were like buying and selling women and girls as collateral for these loans that people were under such duress. You're also someone who is in very deep study of Islam, not just the ibadah side, not just the worship side, but also the action side, right? The ways that the wisdom Islam has for economic change, social change, the tasawwuf, the purification of the heart, also known as Sufism. So someone who is really applying this the praxis of this divine revelation and spiritual wisdom into the actual world, the things that we can do. And we met through Shaykh Umar Ibrahim
Mm.
Vadillo, who has quickly become one of the greatest teachers for me. And I didn't know that through him I would find another one of the great teachers of my life. So
Well,
what,
he's
what a
also one of
blessing.
my greatest teachers.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure you are for him as well, So inshallah, we will continue to all get to learn together and be working together on this work. So as you all can tell, we are in the presence of a very special individual, very special woman. Is there anything you would like to share with us, Dr. Humaira, about yourself that maybe, is not on the website, is not part of the traditional biography?
Well, I never thought, I would end up in politics or journalism or,
Mm,
end up doing such controversial work, I would say.
mm,
As a person, when I was growing up, I was so fond of fine arts and English literature. I'm an MPhil in English literature.
mm,
So from being a theater critic, I just ended up with feminist writings. I was very taken aback by, the women's representation in literature and art. See, people see me as somebody who's a legislator, somebody who did human rights stories as a journalist, a teacher, or somebody who's a leader. But I don't see my life like that. I think I'm a very sensitive person. I went through very unusual exposure in my life, both
mm,
highs and lows, extreme um, situations that I encountered, and I knew that I have to do something. So this something was like, when you see so much injustice, inequality, there's a reaction. And even as a very, very young person, I had that reaction that I'm going to do something.
mm,
So then I end up in the politics from, being in the world of media and literature as a teacher. And this happened because this was the first time an amendment was made in the Pakistani electoral system where it gave proportional representation to women. Now, proportional representation means that you do not contest direct elections. You're nominated by a party for being a distinguished individual who brings a certain expertise from a certain area to enrich the world of
mm,
legislation and legislature. And I was chosen because I had already started writing a lot on women issues, and specifically social issues and violence on women.
mm,
And it was an opportunity because I thought, like, what am I going to do in politics? Because honestly, my siblings would make fun of me. Oh my God, you're going to be one of those corrupt politicians.
mhm.
And I was like, oh no, I don't want it to be like that. Of course, when I entered parliament, I was like 28 years old. I
Wow.
was very young.
And they
And
had no idea what they were getting into bringing you in, huh?
yeah, because you see, this was the first time we were like 60 new women on reserved seats, which is proportional representation. And not all of us were coming from like a technocrat background. Many of those reserved seats were auctioned to the political parties, and those women were the extension of the status quo, or they were the representations of their of the constituencies of their male family members. So I'm not saying I'm the only one, but there were other women as well who were doctors and educators, and I was from a journalist background, which and that did change the temperament of the parliament, the whole the ambience, because we were not trained to be politicians. So I was not diplomat at all. I was very bold. I would question like a journalist would do. I would go deeper into the issues. I would see it from the angle of public opinion, because that was my background. So Alhamdulillah, I think it was. And then when by the time I entered parliament, I had done a lot of stories. There were violence against women, stove killings, women who could not bring dowry, how enigmatically, mysteriously they got killed in the stove killings. I had seen acid attacks. There were women who died in my arms. I'd seen rape victims. I'd seen women sold as a compensation for the crimes committed by their family members, and that customary practice is called winnie. So if you steal a cow, okay, you have done something that has caused harm or to another tribe, so the compensation is you give the woman. Sometimes in marriage, sometimes it's literally like a slave. And I could not believe it. And because from a very young age, I mean, Islam was very important for me. My good and bad came from there. It mattered to me how Allah sees us, what Allah has commanded. I was very sensitive to that. So, and one of the crazy things I did when I went into the parliament, like I said, Allah, I made this like very, very strong prayer. Give me the work that nobody wants to do it. Give me the work which is hardest. And I said, Allah, give me the work that opens the doors of your pleasure. And I didn't know what I was asking, Mazin. I had no idea. So my first 6 months were moving resolutions on violence against women. I would bring cases of extreme violence to call attention in the parliament, where the debates had to stop in order. This is a law and order situation, and the parliament has to look into it and give a ruling on it. And then I realized like there is systemic violence and exploitation, and I have to do it more like structured work. It's not just you getting 3 victims out or 4 victims out. You have to look deeply what policy changes it requires. And it started with acid attacks, because I had seen so many women dying of acid, and I knew it's a weapon. Acid you can buy from a pharmacy, you splash it on somebody's face and you kill them so painfully. And there was a kind of ambiguity in the law that whether it comes as an injury or wound or harm, but I think it was a weapon of killing somebody. So that took a while, and then I instantly moved a resolution against Wani, which is like women given as compensation by crimes committed by their family members. I mean, this was horrendous. And both my stance was, why does the West take this as Sharia? This has nothing to do with Sharia.
Yeah.
So one of my conscious attempts was to separate Islam from tradition, from the customs of the land. And a lot of my exposure in the West, when I had the opportunity to speak to larger audience, and my stance was, this has nothing to do with Sharia. Sharia would take it as a murder attempt. Acid. Sharia would actually, the punishment of rape is extreme in Islam.
Yes.
The punishment of violating a woman is taken very seriously. So this has nothing to do with Islam. Honor killing has nothing to do with Islam. That man is using honor as an instrument to control women. So there was so much a confusion about what Sharia is and what customary practices are. A lot of these are coming from the Hindu culture we had, or our own traditions, which have not been corrected or have not been questioned. So these were the 2 things. But the third thing that I landed in was money lending. So money lending is something I'd never looked into it. And I was very new to the parliament. You have to remember, this is my first year, first 6 months.
And
And I
you're
remember,
now under 30. Is your early 30s
yeah,
by
yeah,
this point.
yeah, 29.
Wow.
I'm still 29. I moved on my legislation within the first 6 months.
Wow.
So it
Wow.
took me 5 years to actually,
Hmm.
win, lobby them and win over my colleagues to vote for them.
Hmm.
So the biggest issue was, again, money lending. Now, who were the money lenders? How did I get exposed to that? I had two women who came to me, very young women, beautiful young women, and they said they are into the profession of prostitution, and they've been put in brothels because they had their families had borrowed money from money lenders, professional money lenders, shark loaners, by the way,
Hmm. Hmm.
and they cannot pay back the interest, and they have put them there in the brothels. And this was like a shock for me. And I was like, what? And then I heard their stories, and then I went back to my media team. I said, we have to do an investigative report on this. Let's pick up this
Hmm.
issue. And I said, I had to call in different districts, all our coordinators and reporters there. I said, I want you to get me all the reports on how money lending is being done. And then I put an ad in my newspapers where I said, all the effects of money lending, please approach me. And I had more than 700 families walking to my office with story, each one horrendous than before. Somebody was selling his kidneys. Somebody's daughter was taken up. The farmers have been usurped with their cultivation land. Somebody's son was killed. So, and money lenders wanted to indebt these people so they could take over their assets.
Yes.
So
And
it's
just
not very different from banking. But
exactly.
the interest they were charging was 300% compound interest. Can you imagine?
So this is actually what I would say is more akin to the forms of extortion that were done by the mafia in the United States. So
It's the
people
same.
here,
They're called like
exactly.
shark loaners,
Shark
you
owner.
know?
So in
Uh,
like New York, for example, the Italian mafia would do these kinds of situations where they would lend someone money. Now you're in debt to them, and then they would kind of escalate in the extremes of what they're asking from you. And
mm.
it's a common practice actually all over the world where people will use this. So I just wanted to kind of give people a little bit of a reference point. It's like a mafia, you know. It's like
It is a
it's a
mafia.
very
It's one of
vicious.
the bigger mafias, yeah.
Mhm.
And then secondly, I did not realize that in order to move that bill in the House, I was
Mhm.
actually opening the Pandora box of the question of
Mhm.
usury and Islam. And I realized that this is an issue that you don't talk about. This is not debated in any parliament in the world.
And we're going to talk about it today, but before we go into it, I actually want to give some context too for like this culture, this land, this place that we are not talking about, right? So I would love for you if you could just a lot of people who are listening right now, they don't really know about Pakistan. They don't know about the history of Pakistan. They don't know, you know, we're talking about all of these very extreme, you know, things. Of course, there's a beautiful side of the land and the culture as well. So could you give us a little bit of just a sense of, you know, this land where you and your family and your ancestors are from, and the dynamics in which these things are happening, just so that people can have a little bit of a sense. So I would love if you could share a little bit of, you know, how Pakistan came to be, how Islam kind of came to Pakistan, just very brief, you know, overview, and then people can kind of get a sense of what you're sharing.
Well, then I start from like we are a 5,000 old civilization, the Indus
Mm,
civilization,
mm-hmm,
and we have a rich culture of tradition, a rich culture and tradition. And if you go into the old, um, you know, the Vedics we come from, and the Sanskrit language, and the amount of
mm-hmm,
influence, and how civilized
mm-hmm,
we were. The ruins of the Bronze Age of Mohenjo-daro and
mm-hmm.
Harappa, which are one of the oldest civilizations from the Bronze Age, we were ahead in our civilization and how the cities were developed,
Yes.
and we were very rich. So I'm talking about now Pakistan and India that comes into conception after the British Raj. We were conquered.
Exactly. Exactly.
I come from a Rajput family. We were part of the ruling class. You know, we were from the Mughal dynasty. My caste comes from the people who were warriors, who were commanders in the army.
And the Mughal
So
dynasty are the ones who sacked Constantinople, is that correct?
no. These are Mughal. That's Ottomans. So we have
Okay.
like three main civilizations: the
Mm.
Andalusian, and then
Hmm.
the Ottomans, and then the Mughals. The Mughals ruled. They come from the Turk and the Persian descent,
Mm.
and they ruled over the subcontinent for years until the
Hmm.
fall of the Mughal Empire, taken
Hmm.
by the British Raj, and then we have more than 100 years of colonialism
Hmm.
and a lot of problems, which I may, we can talk about that later in some other, time, but how much colonialism affected and how it
Yeah.
affected women and violence and perception of women. So
Right.
anyway, so today Pakistan is like any other country. We are modern and we are conservative at the same time. So we have
Hmm.
multiple Pakistans.
Hmm.
The urban Pakistan is like, you'll be surprised if you come to Lahore. It's so beautiful. You have skyscrapers, you have development, you can see women walking in jeans and our
Hmm.
traditional dress as well. They speak English better than the British,
Hmm.
you
Yeah,
know. And
they do.
and we have a history of female prime minister, we have
Hmm.
female police officers, we have judges, and we have women parliamentarians. And
Right.
I mean, that's one aspect. And then we have a rural
Hmm.
Pakistan also, which is more conservative, which
Yeah.
is more traditional, which is changing every year, but they are also very, very loyal to their customs and their
Hmm.
traditions. And then
Yeah.
we have like a caste system, we have the divisions of Shia Sunni,
Hmm.
and Pakistan strategically is like a strip, which is like, of, I think it has a huge importance because of its geopolitical location. So we
Hmm.
have a lot of influence and pressure from all our neighbors, including
Right.
war on terror that we were part
Right.
of.
Right.
So Pakistan is as modern as you want to think it to be,
Yes.
and as conservative as you want it to. You can have an
And
exposure of Pakistan that is like extremely conservative also.
of course. And similarly in Sudan, I think one of the things that and in most, what is now called the third world. And third world, I used to think it was because they're the third, like they're in the past, but it actually means there was two worlds. There's America and the West, and then there was Russia and the East, and capitalism and communism. And the third world was everyone else. That was basically the battlegrounds for these two,
Mm.
forces. So most of the third world, I think what happened is that, in any culture, in any society, there are some practices that are, for lack of better words, backwards, right? And in the context of colonization, of immense poverty, of economic exploitation, somehow it seems that the worst of those kind of traditions sometimes make it to the top, and the best of our traditions sometimes actually get hidden in the history books. And
Mm.
it's a deeper conversation, but it's just to put it into the context of sometimes. It's similar with in Sudan. There was this ancient Egyptian practice that's not
Mm.
was not a modern. Everyone was doing it, but just a small group of people. But somehow it then started to proliferate, and it has nothing to do with Islam. It has nothing to do with the mainstream culture. But sometimes these
Exactly.
these backwards practices, it's kind of a result of poverty, of lack of education, right? People who are as the economy, I imagine in the height of the Indus civilization, right? Even though there was a caste system, there was many things that were wrong with it. There was maybe access to education in a different way. There might have been things that were not as prevalent
No, we were
today.
much more liberal. Honestly,
Yeah.
I mean, the Mughals, and that's a whole another conversation. But
Hmm.
how women were, we had women queens, we had women
Hmm.
warriors, we
Hmm.
had mystics, we had, amazing history of women. But then
Hmm.
again, the 50s and 60s and 70s were much liberal in Pakistan. Our 80s, it happened under a general of an army general who was a dictator. Now, this Islamization is a very important decade of Pakistan because
Hmm.
everybody thinks, we actually, Pakistan, it was an attempt to bring, the real spirit of Islam. In fact, it was an
It was the opposite.
Islamization in the
Yeah.
modernist sense.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
actually created laws that went against women.
Yeah. The
sometimes
same
even
thing, yeah.
against the freedom that was given by Islam as well.
Yes, yeah. The same thing happened in Sudan. My grandma talks about when she was, young, they were so free and they would go to the disco and they would dance and they would ride on the train and the trolley and it was very,
Yeah.
progressive. And then in the 80s, there was a dictator who came in and, brought what now people think of as Sharia, they think of as Islam, they think of as, but it had nothing to do with that. And if anything, it actually reflected the colonizer mentality more than anything else. So.
Exactly.
So thank you so much. I just wanted to give people a chance to understand, the complexity of this space that you're talking about and that you're
Mhm.
working in. And just to add another layer to this, I would love so, what you've shared is that basically you had this prayer to Allah, right? And Allah just again, it means God, right? In Aramaic, which is the language spoken by Jesus Christ, the word for God is ilah or ilahu. In Arabic, it's
Yeah.
Allah, and in English, it's God, but it's all the same word. We're talking about the divine. You made a supplication to Allah, and you asked to basically be doing the hardest work, the work no one wants to do, and that's exactly what you got, right? You just listed like some of the most, that's the darkest of the dark underbelly of the society that you were
Mm.
living in. And subhanallah, like you made a lot of amazing progress. It's very, very amazing. So I would love to hear for you, what was it like to be, a mystic in the parliament, a Sufi, a Muslim? When people hear Sufi, when I say Sufi, I mean people who are more Muslim than the average Muslim, right? People who are really interested in taqwa, like really want to practice Allah's commands more than they want to like live, right? And this is the
Mm.
energy I get from you is that you are fearless in the face of the world because you are fully surrendered to Allah. So yeah, how did that make you stand out and how did that influence your work in politics? Because right now the least religious, the least spiritual, the least ethical, the least like self-reflective and introspective, self-transformation people tend to be the ones ruling our countries and ruling
Mm.
and our governments, right? So I would just love for people to get a sense for what happens when someone on the path
Well, I
is.
don't know. I would not. I never saw myself as Sufi. I
Mhm,
didn't know where I stand because this is how the outside world looks at you. For
mhm,
me, it was like, you know, I said to myself, I will be judged and I'll be accountable. That Allah has put me in a platform of power, and if I
mhm,
don't change or at least try to change, I'm answerable. And this was like at the heart of my, my intention and my conviction.
mhm,
And as I realized, as I progressed, the first year I realized like I'm talking about, debating about issues they're not comfortable with. And already I had started getting warnings. Madam, you're not supposed to say this. Madam, don't do this. And I said, okay. So there are do's and don'ts. And then I
mhm,
remember I wrote an article in one of the local newspapers as puppet parliamentarians. And I just really mocked like how we are supposed to be puppet. We have to say the right things. We have to toe the party lines, and genuine kind of introspection and desire to change the system is not allowed. So there
mhm,
was a backlash, and yet
mhm,
I also got a lot of appreciation from certain people. Wow, a woman is so openly criticizing the system that she belongs to, or she
mhm.
is inside that system.
And is benefiting
And then
from
I
it.
remember, yeah,
Mhm,
and then I wrote another article which was more tongue in cheek, like the seven sins of a parliamentarian.
mhm,
And that was like taken, like, it was like another shock that I gave. Like, I'm criticizing my own community, with like
mhm,
how we say certain things for fame, how we have a hunger for this, how we
mhm,
are greedy for position. And,
mhm,
I can share that article with you, but then I got a response. And I remember one of the phone calls that I received was from the governor of the Punjab. He said, I am reading your article and I can't stop being amused. You have, you know, thrown the system inside out and showed it. And I said, Mr. Governor, you're part of the system. Don't think that you are above it. We are all part of it because
mhm.
we are asked to play a role and we are asked to
Yeah,
fit into a box that they have
yeah.
created for us.
Mhm,
So it was difficult. Okay, then I I have always seen myself as a warrior, as an
mhm,
activist. I am an
mhm,
activist. And when Islam is very close to my heart because I love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My relationship with him was like intimate, and it mattered to me what his commands were. I wanted to know. At 29, I hardly had exposure to Sharia or fiqh at that time, just the basics. But I think when I started acting upon it, because my faith was that this is what Allah has declared as wrong. And if usury is forbidden, then there is exploitation. And I have all the evidence, like how it is harming anybody. So as I acted upon it, I got more openings. I got more courage. Allah made me, every 5 years, 4.5 went in advocating and fighting for my bills. And every year came with more warnings, intimidation, with sometimes threats. And every time when I encountered that, I became bigger, not scared. And I knew that Allah will protect me. And I didn't know whether I would be able to pass a bill or not. And I thought, no, I am doing the right thing. My legislation is like a piece of bomb in my hand, because I'm getting warnings from the chief minister, I'm getting warnings from the bureaucracy, I'm getting warnings from the intelligence, I'm getting warnings from the mafia, money lending. So this is something I must be doing right. So I'm going to hold on to it. And I had to sacrifice. I was not in the good books. I was said, like, you're the most unmanageable woman. You're a troublemaker. You don't listen. You're rebellious. And then they said, like, you should not be returned to parliament. And then, so I knew I was offered to be the head of standing committees, which is a very important position. And I declined. And they said, if you want to be part of the cabinet or a minister, you can't behave like this. So I knew that, it's already like I'm the black sheep. So I didn't mind it. And I didn't care, because I thought, no, this is difficult and I have to do it. And I think Allah was the one who put conviction in my heart and that courage. I became more audacious. I became more brave. I became more fearless. And it was a evolution that I had within that 5 years.
I appreciate hearing this so much, because it's true all over the world, but we're in America here on my side, right? This is the belly of the beast, and the level of spiritual, deprived, right? Depravity comes from the root of deprived, right? Spiritual depravity that is in our political system is unbelievable, right? From the Epstein stuff to the exploitation, to the way, inside trading, with all, like, profiting off of wars. And what you're sharing, right, for someone to be fearless and, like, engaging in political service and leadership and power as a spiritual and, act of service for humanity, for a higher power, is so antithetical to what we know and what we experience here. Here, a politician is, like, I know it's similar there. If you think of a politician, they're a snake. They're what I mean? They're just there for the money. They're just for the power. And like, but we're so used to it here that we see someone like who's slightly less evil, and we celebrate them like they're the best person ever, right? People are like, oh, we miss Obama. He was so great, because then we had, Biden and Trump and people like that recently, that people would look back to Obama, even though he was bombing, children and killed 1 million Iraqis and all of these things. And I was just actually speaking on, in a previous episode with Dr. Cornel West. He's currently running for the president of the United States. And we were talking about the same thing, about how, here we talk about this in the language of movements, right? We have all these movements for liberation, right? And humans are fighting against these powers and these different groups of people who seem to just want to enslave us again and again and again. And of course, in Islam, we have a different understanding for the origins of this battle, right? But we can all see it, whatever tradition people are from. And we talked about this thing of just how important it is for there to be a spiritual foundation and to be a faith, right? Because here you're talking about an accountability that is not about whether or not you're going to get hired again, but you're talking about a higher accountability, the highest accountability, right? And that's what inspires you. And you're talking about commands and things that are forbidden not only in Islam, but usury was forbidden in Christianity. Usury was forbidden in
Yeah.
Judaism between your countrymen, right, by Moses in the command, not in the commandments, but it was in Deuteronomy for the people who study that. But also in my research, I saw that in the Tang dynasty of China, in ancient Egypt, like this is something that, in the Gupta period of India and the Indus civilization.
Exactly. Every society has condemned it.
And here now in our current society, it is the absolute foundation of our reality. Like we're
Yeah.
talking, when we say usury, we're talking about credit cards. We're talking about fiat money and inflation. We're talking
Stock
about the
exchange
entire
and all the speculative
everything,
aspect of the
right?
economy.
The
Yeah.
entire economy is based on usury now. And this was not the case for
Yeah.
the entirety of human history until the 18th century. Up until then, everyone said this is the worst. And as Shaykh Umar talks about, every government, one of their main jobs, right, is like protect you from war and stop usury. Those are like the two things that they did. And then suddenly the
Mm.
18th century, it's like all of the government became usury entities, right? And so I would love to get into that a little bit so you're already noticing this. You've already got a hint. Okay, there's this thing called usury, and like it's just normalized everywhere, and no one's even talking about it. Even in Islam, where it's like the last religion actually that still bans it explicitly, right? Orthodox Jews, actually, to give them credit, they do not practice usury amongst each other, right? They will
Exactly.
do
Yeah.
it. They will do it with Gentiles, but they will not do it to get each other because they view it as unethical, which is of course interesting, right? So
Though they see it as a curse.
yeah, there
Yeah.
you go. They see it as a curse. You do it and you're cursed, right? And so,
Exactly.
and in Islam, it's not too different. It's like you're basically you're declaring, God has declared war. God and the Prophet Muhammad
And
alayhi
you, yeah,
salatu
exactly.
wasalam, right, have declared war on the people who engage in this. So it's bad, right? But it's so normalized. And I would love to just hear, okay, you got a hint of it, you got a taste, you got to see. This is what usury does. People are charging 300% interest. They're selling women. They're enslaving people. Like it's taking people back all the way to the back, the worst, of human behavior. And then
Yeah.
at some point you meet Shaykh Umar. So tell us a little bit about this story of then meeting someone who is, one of the leading thinkers in how we are going to actually eradicate this evil practice from our society and return to what you actually ended up doing some writing calling the praxis of prosperity. Maybe it was you who coined that term. That is
Yes.
taking this concept of mu'amalat and bringing it to a very, very understandable. That's actually when I discovered it. I understood it through your language. So please just tell us a little bit about this story.
Well, there's a big gap between, because you see, by 5 years of parliament, and then my bill gets passed, which was a history itself, because it was the first legislation ever passed by a female member
Mm,
or individual member. And then it was later, when I was invited at Harvard University for a fellowship. So one of the founder of the Harvard Divinity School, Dr. Harvey, he said to me, "Do you know your legislation is the first legislation ever in the history of man who prescribed punishment to usury?" And I was like shocked. And he said, you see, the church has condemned it. Islam has declared war. And you say 10 years punishment, which is like in spirit, it's very close to the strictness of what Islam says. But prescribing punishment
mm,
in the system, this is the first piece of legislation. And I think that is why I was invited. Now, I'm already, okay, the bill gets passed, I go low key, there is a huge, all of a sudden people say, "Who's this woman? Who's this person?" And I think that is why Harvard invited me. They wanted to know, like, who's this person?
mm.
And I think they did monitor me, and they saw, like, she's bad.
Right.
Because I didn't have an
She's a threat.
agenda. So whose interest is serving? And I think one of my colleagues said that, oh, they must be looking into you and they must realize that you're mad because you're not following anybody's agenda. You actually believe in it. So it was like that. And now I had the challenge, like, okay, usury is bad, but then what is the template of Islam?
Mm.
And
What's
I am
good?
here surrounded by Islamic bankers and whole conundrum of what is permitted, what is not permitted. Islamic banking is right or wrong. And I already knew this is a fraud. I was having meetings. Now, this is my second term. I go back to the parliament and I haven't met Shaykh Umar yet.
Hmm.
And I spent 3 years in the parliament this time. And I am doing meetings with the ulamas, with the Islamic scholars, the jurisprudence experts. I'm bringing in agriculture policy. Why I was interested in the farmers? Because the middleman is the one who's charging, who's the money lender there. He buys the crops cheap. He hoards them. He is charging, compound interest from the farmers. He's destroying the farmers. Then he hoards, and then he's controlling the prices. And I said, oh my goodness, I have to do something about it. I have to find a way to remove this middleman who actually covered by my bill. He's in the definition of money lender. But then why somebody's not implementing my bill? Now the challenges was, how do you implement this bill? Because money lending and charging interest-based compound loans were in every sector, from filmmaking, transport,
and just
agriculture,
I'm so sorry to
everywhere.
sorry to interrupt you, but just so people can get a sense of what you're talking about here, we actually have a very
So that's when I believe.
Okay. I just wanted to give a quick reference. So many people here have heard of, what's happening in India, particularly where organizations like Monsanto will basically put farmers into such a state of debt.
In the West,
right?
It's the corporations that took over the small farmers.
Exactly. And then people end up killing themselves because they're in debt that it would take multiple generations to pay off. And secondly, to just say that, here we've really recently seen that our groceries have gone up by 2, 3, and 4%. And just so people can be aware, the farmer actually makes 8 cents on the dollar of everything that you buy from your Whole Foods, Safeway, all these grocery stores. And then there's the transportation, which is like 10%. And then all the rest of it is the same scheme, the same racket that you're talking about, where there are all these people who are just middlemaning on middleman and charging interest and compounding interest and controlling the rates. And so we're all paying 4 and 5 times what the actual value of our food is.
And the profit is not even going to the farmer. The poor farmer is poor. It's the middleman. So actually, this issue, when I went to Harvard, and I had like amazing interactions with some of the professors and experts, and they said, here it's the corporations that have destroyed the small farmer. The small farmer can't sell, can't afford, and the big corporations have monopolized. So you have another big problem, which is even bigger than ours. So it was a challenge, and I found. I remember that it was almost by the end of my second term that I found about Shaykh Umar. And how did I find about him? It was like one of my colleagues who went to Malaysia came back with this book of gold dinar, and he puts it in my hand. He says, Dr. Humaira, you have to actually read this book, because I was already, debating in Parliament about what happened in Utah. And, the whole debate of sound money, gold and silver, and 10A clause of American Constitution, which says only gold and silver can be the legal tender. So I said, if this is legal tender, then, one of the unique things about the Pakistani Constitution is that it has a clause which it says that the state must eliminate riba, usury. So all the debate I do, any resolutions or bills I'm moving, I'm covered by the Constitution. So they can't tell me I'm unconstitutional. So that gave me a lot of space. So when I started reading Shaykh Umar's book, and I said, okay, this is amazing. Somebody's actually bringing the Islamic gold dinar, which is the Islamic gold currency. And there is now what is the alternative is what I have to face. And I'm trying to put small pieces together, because I'm not an Islamic expert or an economic expert. But I already knew this Islamic banking is even worse than the commercial banking, because now they're using Islamic terms to justify, interest in the name of markup and profit, and
and the irony
horrendous.
Is the experts, the Islamic experts, and the economic experts that are working on this issue, they are the ones messing it all up and making it so evil.
Not messing. So, I would get threats, Mazin. I went to two biggest scholars in Pakistan. Mufti Taqi Usmani, who's like the author of Islamic banking. Yeah, and I went to one of the biggest jamias, which is like the place of jamia is like an Arabic word for university. So of fiqh and jurisprudence. And I said, help me. This is what I'm trying to do. I need help from these scholars. I need help from these people who believe what is forbidden, what is halal and haram in Islam. And they would and some of the ulamas actually supported me. And there were others who confronted me. Who are you? See, the easiest thing that they could have on me was a woman as a woman, you're going to tell us what is Islam? You know, and that kind of approach. And I said, well, I'm not a woman, I'm a legislator here. And I have power, and I can summon you to the parliament, and you better come and, reply to the whole house. Why have you allowed this? So I was brought here to take, I was like now pretty prepared, for that kind of thing. And I remember that they were look, I have to give credit to my colleagues who were my co-parliamentarians who stood up. I could not have passed the bill without them. And actually, that taught me how to advocate, how to lobby, how to bond with people, how to bring people on board. And that is a very, very good practice for your nerves, for your ego. Yeah. So it's not me. I said, it's us. I want you to take the credit. I want you to stand up for us. I want men to protect women. So it was an amazing, amazing learning experience for me, how you bring people on board, how you bond, I had conversations with people just about our moral responsibility. How can you be amoral? How can you not look into it? And I'm telling you, there were people, they were head of the clans, who stood up for me, who supported my work. And I'm proud of all those men and honestly, the tribal leaders that the whole world condemns were my supporters on women issues. They were my supporters on standing up to this, fraudulent system of usury and deception. So there are always silent people. So we can't brand like Pakhtuns and Talibans and these extremists. How many of them supported me? You'll be surprised. So all that branding comes from media. I'm not saying every Pakhtun is like that, but I'm saying there were amazing people who supported me in these resolutions, in these laws. And the appreciation that I get from America, when I went to America, I can't tell you, there were two things that I learned from America. The obstructionism in legislating for women was as bad that I felt I encountered in Pakistan. So I was a lead advocate for International Violence Against Women Act in US Congress and Senate. And I realized the women were going through the same thing.
Yeah, and just know everyone. She just said that say what you were doing again, because I forgot to put this in your bio. But you were working with a later presidential candidate. Yeah,
I was selected by this consortium of women, where more than 150 women organizations came together, including Amnesty International, and they moved a legislation coming from these women groups as International Violence Against Women Act. Now, this legislation was about conflict-torn regions. It demanded that women and children are protected. This should be part of the preemption, if you are going to, you understand there is going to be a conflict, why don't you protect women and children? Why do you have to wait for 30,000 rapes to happen for you to intervene? Now, this was coming from very senior feminists, women policymakers, women rights. You had Jewish organizations there. We had Christian organizations where we had blacks, we had whites, and we had like 5 or 6 women senators who were tabling this bill, including John Kerry was part of that. And I don't know why they just came across me and my profile, and they said, we want you to be one of the advocates. We want you to testify for it, to look at it, how is this relevant for Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iraq? So I learned a lot about American politics in my exposure, because I was dealing with Republicans and Democrats, and I was talking to their teams, and I was talking to the senators themselves. I talked to national security fellows, why could they not prevent violence? And they became part of, the people who did violence on women of Afghanistan and Iraq. I had like amazing conversations with them and encounters with them. But then I realized I had so much more space and support in America as part of these women NGOs. And I found some of the most amazing women. And I had the most amazing hugs, random hugs on metro or during the subway. And some woman would just come and hug me. Thank you for doing that for the women of America. And I said, we are one. And, I had so much support from my neighbors who knew what the kind of work I was doing as part of Harvard Fellow was, to represent this international violence against women in US Congress and Senate. So it was amazing for me. And yet I understood this structural control, this structural, tightness on around the policy of women was
Yeah.
very similar to what I had encountered.
Yes.
And
Because
they were not
ultimately,
ready
yeah,
because it was money. It was about money. It
exactly.
was about money
Yeah.
to allocate a huge funding for the protection, security of women in these conflict-torn regions.
And because the goal of conflict in these conflict-torn regions, if we are honest about it, right, is that we all know and heard of the military-industrial complex, right?
Of course,
This conflict is one of the main sources of income for the elite of the world. Let's just say it as it is, right? Uh, Most of the investments and stocks and bonds and things, BlackRock and Vanguard and these major investment things, they're investing in Lockheed Martin and all these big. And if now
mm,
they want to go into Iraq and make billions in this war, right? Billions of U.S. tax dollar money, right? We're paying for this, right? So this is how they
exactly,
take our money, right, to go fight a war that we now know in Iraq there was no weapons of mass destruction. We know in
exactly.
Afghanistan the Taliban were created by the United States and trained by the United States to fight the Russians, and then so if you now have to stop this money making machine and now you have to go like protect women, right? Or if now in modern case, like, you can't just go and bomb Palestine and bomb Gaza. You have to pause. You can't just go and
Exactly.
expand your land. You have to actually go and deal with the women and children. No one wants to deal with that because they want to make the money, right? So I'm glad that you got to share a little bit about that, and just so people can see, right, how this is all tied together, right? This is all
Exactly.
our economic system, right? And this kind of fiat usury based money system, it actually makes all of this possible, because even these wars would not be possible if we didn't have fake money. The Vietnam War was why America had to leave the gold standard. We were on the gold
Exactly.
standard until then, but the Vietnam War, we wanted to keep going. The war had to end. They were like, we're out of money. We got to stop the war. It said, well, what if we just
And
make more? What if we just print more money?
it's the same
Exactly.
banking establishment funding on the both sides of the
Both
war.
sides of the war. Exactly. And that's
Yeah.
how war is so
No, I'm
profitable.
so
So,
glad, Mazin, that you understand these issues because honestly, I mean, I was in a democracy, and I
mhm,
think I'm entitled to say that there is no democracy, it's oligarchy.
yeah.
It's the rich few people who control and who have this edge over the rest of the people. I mean,
Yeah.
that's another, session we should do,
It's a
like
whole nother
go
session.
in
Yeah.
details, how it
Yeah.
works. But
But
I'm
I
so
think it's a
glad.
beautiful, yeah. And I think it's a beautiful transition to actually bring us back to the beautiful story we were telling about. So you got the book of Shaykh Umar. Please continue the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. And then I wrote to him and I said, like, I am this member of the parliament. I've just passed a law. I look up to you. What are the precedent you're setting in Malaysia?
Hmm.
So I would like to invite you on the behalf of the committee of parliamentary committee we have made on riba, how to like eradicate riba. So, this was more like a formal. And I remember that Sheikh Umar sends me a message back. And I was thought like, it will get lost. Like who replies on their social media? And this was Facebook. I couldn't find his email. So I get a reply from him in few days. And he says, wow, I had thought that there's hardly any men doing this work, but you're a woman who's passed a law. So this was like a shock for him as well. So he was like, but his part of the story you should take from him. But I was like amazed, like he's responding. And he said, Dr. Humaira, we should uh, initiate this in the parliament and from your office. And then I was like taken aback. I said, oh my God, this man thinks I'm the chief minister of Pakistan. And this man is
uh,
probably going to get me assassinated. I'm already the black sheep everywhere. And now
oh
he
my
thinks he wants
gosh.
to launch the golden hour from my office. And I said, let's see, okay, I wrote it back because this is a sheikh. And then I think I was traveling to America for my book. I actually wrote a book, which
Mm,
is actually a whole story of how I passed my legislation, the inside story. So I was there to, work with my publisher and my co-writer. And then
mashallah.
I get an invitation from Sheikh Umar to come to Kelantan, that there was this conference of a launching of a new golden hour coin. And I was very excited about this. And that's when I went in the summer, I think it was 2012. So I had written to him in January, and then we had an exchange of few emails and messages, and then I meet him in June 2012, and then I was like shocked. I'm in the middle of Kelantan and he's launching a gold coin. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So finally, I find lions who are working in this issue because Mazin, I was so alone. I was so unprotected. And by the time, well, I was married previously and I had 3 children, but I became widow at a very young age. So I lost my husband when I was 30, in my early 30s. And my law got passed after I became a widow. So I had like 6, 7 years before I met Shaykh Umar again. And that was my second marriage with him. But I felt so unprotected and I used to ask her, where are the men? Where are the
Wait,
men?
so you just kind of breezed past that. So, and then you fell in love and got married.
Of course,
That's
it was
beautiful.
not love. It was not even love. I have to tell you, it's like
Mm,
when I looked at him, I felt like I know this man for a very long time from
mm,
another place. It was such a
mhm,
strong spiritual connection. And it
mhm,
was like a mirror reflection of what I believed in. But this
mhm,
time it was a man. And
mhm.
he was talking about way ahead of me how to put the template that I was looking. But Mazin, it happened like 6 years of prayers
Wow.
and passing a bill and asking Allah, where are your warriors, of Islam? Where are those scholars? Where are those experts? And then, Alhamdulillah, I found him. And then even that, when I thought like, okay, I have to bring the Sheikh to Pakistan. So I was like a murid, the ultimate thing I would have thought about was I become his PR, to
Uh-huh.
the Muslim world and to the scholars. And look,
Mhm,
I had so much experience of that. And then within 6 months, I think the Sheikh proposed me. And then, I was like reluctant whether I should get married again or not. And then finally, I knew it was. And it's a
mhm,
spiritual journey of finding
mhm,
who, how, who he was for me
mhm,
it's a whole another story, probably for another,
mhm,
conversation. And then
mhm.
we married within 6 months. And
Wow.
then we collaborated our work. And then I learned so much from him. And then it's a series of steps that we took together. I brought him, we filed a riba petition in the Islamic Sharia court of Pakistan, and then
Wow.
taking him to the ulamas. And then in the process, I was learning because I didn't know so many things that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I'm
And
still learning.
it's so beautiful the way that God, the way that Allah will bring people together. Today in modern days, when and our next episode, everyone, is going to be about love and relationships because Dr. Humaira, mashallah, is a very, 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 very deep and wise teacher in this regard. But we'll get to that next episode. But what I want to say today is that um, the way that he will bring people together through marriage I call marriage a spiritual technology. This is what I learned when I met my wife and we got
Mm.
married is that we love each other and people say that love grows and stuff like that. Like I was lucky. I got very lucky. We fell in love very quickly. We met each other, but the love
Mhm.
grows to something that I could have never imagined before we got married. A and B, it's really our love for Allah, our love for God that actually is the glue of our relationship because
Mm.
our love and the human love for between us it's very strong, but who knows what it's gonna ebb, it's gonna flow, right? We're in the beginning stages, all these things, but we both love Allah and we love the work and the service that needs to come through us from God, and that's really what our relationship is about, and I can see that the same is there, and it's very inspiring for me and
Well, Sheikh
for
Abdul
yeah.
Qadir uses the word as collaborative couple.
There we go. Wow.
The collaborative couple is Allah is the center of that love story. And you
Mm,
love each other through Allah. And you
mm,
nurture the higher side of each other. And that's how you collaborate spiritually. I mean, we'll
mm.
take that up in details
Yeah.
because that's the story of for me and Sheikh Umar. I
Wow.
mean, I I I I can't imagine without the spiritual aspect because I was mature by the time I met him, and he was also a full-fledged sheikh. He was
Mhm,
and and then I knew, and I was asking Allah, and then I was also asking for protection because
mhm,
I felt very unprotected. I mean,
mhm,
you as a Muslim woman, a public figure, somebody who's
mhm,
controversial, somebody who's very audacious, somebody who's
mhm,
willing to have confrontations. I
mhm.
knew how it's so easy to scandalize me, and I was
Yes.
already getting. I was already saying, if you don't behave, if you don't resign, we will, you know, I mean, I don't even know how to say,
The
we'll put your
blackmail and the exact.
pornographic website, we will create a sex scandal of you. And it was already there. So I
Mm,
felt very, very unprotected. And I was so
mm,
happy that Allah was kind to me. Allah
mm.
brought me a man who made me grow
Wow.
and who taught me so much of the inward. I was all outward. Sheikh
Mm,
Omar brought the inward, the meaning of everything.
mm,
I have never been valued by anybody more
mm,
than Sheikh Omar because everybody said like, you're too much. You are, confronting the system. Why you're doing? You're jeopardizing yourself, your career, your children. And nobody would say, wow, you did something amazing at a
mm,
cost that was big. I had
mm,
to quit politics, Mazin, after that. After
mm.
2 terms, I cannot go back. I wrote a book to expose the
Yeah.
system. The system will not accept me unless the
Yeah.
system changes itself,
Right. Right.
And then
Yeah.
there was this man who appreciates because, he's a giant compared to me. He's done so much. And finally, I don't only get to learn and work with him, I get his protection.
Wow.
I became, I become one of the closest person to him,
Wow.
so that was an honor for me.
That's so beautiful. Ah, what a beautiful conversation. There's so much we haven't gotten to touch, and I'm so glad that, fortunately for you all who are listening, Dr. Humaira has agreed to do at least one more conversation with us. But I wanted to, before we end, I would love to just get a chance to um, tap into your imagination. Because one of the things that I want this Ancient Futures podcast to do is to introduce people to what's possible, because that's what meeting Shaykh Umar, really through his podcast and through his teachings and his and before I actually met him, it changed my life by showing me a different realm of possibility that was under
Mm,
my nose the whole time, right? And he showed it to me through Islam, which of course is so close to home to me as a
mm,
Muslim, and actually was one of the things that brought me back into Islam and deepened my Islam, was actually seeing that the the desire I had in my heart for justice and for human liberation and for
mm,
equity and for freedom and was actually in Islam, not something I needed to fit into Islam or make Islam fit into, so to speak,
mm,
but more so because I just didn't have access to a level of hope like what I got from
mm,
learning and hearing what was possible from the model of Medina, the mu'amalat, what you have coined as the praxis of prosperity. And I've been using your terminology all over,
mm.
and it's very, very helpful. So what I would love to ask you is this. We'll go maybe in a future episode. I'd love to interview the Sheikh. I'd love to talk to you about breaking down the whole system. But now I just want you to say, like, if you had a magic wand and you could go back to Pakistan and you could implement the praxis of prosperity across the nation, right? And just it was all possible, right? What would it look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What would Pakistan be like? What would it be like for the farmers? What would it be like for the average citizen going to the supermarket and shopping? What would it be like for a young person trying to buy a house? And then I will do the same for America. And I just want to end on this just a little window into the possibility of what they're going to be learning from you, from Dr. Sheikh Umar, from this podcast, inshallah.
Well, if I have to, I have a magic wand and I go back and I actually do this magic and my country becomes prosperous, but without being better human beings and without being change of heart and not going into the meaning, I would not do it. And probably that is not what
First
has
and
happened.
foremost.
I would rather change their hearts
Mm,
and then give them the power to change the system, to see
yeah.
into the meaning of what justice is, what spirituality is, what it is to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the divine. And the principles of justice, equality, and brotherhood are coming from there. But if
Mm,
you are a dark, evil, uncaring person, what good is prosperity,
mhm.
Mazin?
Absolutely. I mean,
Zero.
we can
So
see
I would
exactly
rather
what it is.
do the magic on the heart and give
Mhm.
them the courage through their hearts and spiritual insight to change the system so that you truly bring the prosperity model. Like one of the things that is in my paper about Ibn Khaldun.
Mhm.
where he talks about Umran. And he
Mhm.
talks about that the external development of the society is not possible until that society's inward changes. And how does the inward change? The inward change with the concept of asabiya, which is brotherhood, which is like, I care for you like I care for myself.
Mhm.
With that compassion, with that empathy, with that brotherhood, then with that inward, you have the outward prosperity
Yeah.
in its true sense. Otherwise,
And
it's will take you away from
I totally
the
yeah. You're right. You're right. You're right. And just to give people an intro to this word, asabiya, it means brotherhood, but it actually means it in a non-gendered way. Asabiya doesn't mean like
care, care.
akhwan is asabiya, right? But akhu is a brother. But asabiya is like
Mm,
a level of care and interconnect. So it's just to for the women who are listening, this is a term that is actually inclusive of everyone, and it talks about
mm,
siblinghood. Maybe we could say. Um, okay, so let me ask you the question again because I do want to give people. So many of the people who are listening here, of course, we all have a lot of work to do in our hearts, and inshallah, next episode you will help us to begin going further on that journey. But many of the people here, their hearts are full of love that are listening, and they really just
mm.
don't have the information, the tools to understand because it's been systematically hidden, right? Not just
Exactly.
from Islamic history, but from global history. Like this is something that is not taught because it
Mm.
challenges the very foundations of our society and our economy and the whole racket that we're all being oppressed and exploited by. So let's say we spent 10 years on the hearts of Pakistan, right? And
Mm.
now we've entered into the stage where people are ready to start to look at public markets, to start to look at guilds as a way instead of monopolies, instead of
Yeah.
mafias doing money lending, we have sadaqah based money lending. So what are some of the dreams that you have for your people if they were ready and we could actually implement some of these things we're learning from Sheikh Umar?
Oh, I pray that, that is my desire of my heart as well, because Pakistan is so important as a Muslim country, and any changes that happen there will so be easily replicated. And I'm telling you, we are also the worst because we are the authors of Islamic banking. So that kuffara, that compensation has to come from Pakistan.
Mm,
Are the people ready? They are ready. Do the people understand? Intuitively, they understand because the guilds, one of the aspects of the components of our system,
mhm,
we use the word baradari, which actually means brotherhood.
mhm,
It's still there. The memories are there. For example, all the big markets, they're still called mandi. They're not called bazaars. Because
mhm,
bazaar is for a smaller market. Mandi means like huge markets. And people are using the word like Azam Mandi, Shalam Mandi, without understanding that Mandi has been lost. So
mhm,
it's still part of our terminology. The tradition is there. Okay, what is asabiya? Collaboration, cooperation. It's
mhm.
still there. It's
Yes.
just that we have the most sick and the most lowest level of capitalism compared to the rest of the world. Pakistan's capitalism is like a gutter that is throwing out the garbage. It is so unexposed.
Right.
It is so out. It's not in a skeleton inside the cupboard. It's not
Yeah.
hidden. The
Yeah.
corruption, the violation, the extortionism is all there. And
Yes.
I believe that it is so obvious that there is no way out.
Yeah.
If by magic it happens, I mean, we will return back to the Mughal Empire glory.
Mm.
We will go back to Jahangir and Shah Jahan and the prosperity. I mean, we were 25% of the GDP before British Raj,
Of
GDP
the
of the
world.
world.
Yes.
China and Pakistan and India together, we were 25%. Our province of Bengal was so rich that we were probably 13 times more than the GDP of Britain. Can you imagine?
It's I
The
can't
amount of
because
gold we had, we were so prosperous, we were more civilized, we were so rich, we were a different society,
yeah.
and we were plundered and we were violated and we were exploited and we
Yeah.
were killed, and it happened with 100 years of bloodshed. They had to abolish our guilds, they had to take away our wakafs, they had to steal our replace it with paper money, our gold and silver. We were plundered, we were
Mm.
raw.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And
and it took them 100 years to break down our empire. I mean, for me to, we go back into our glory, into the height, the climax of our prosperity, and as a civilization. I mean, we all dream of this. Is a dream of every
yes,
person from Hindustan.
yes.
You know,
Thank you so much for sharing that. And this dream is something that I want to actually infect us here on this side, because I feel like here people, we don't they don't have something to. So many of us in America have lost our history, right? Because
yeah,
either you're white and you have your history lost because it was, whitewashed. They like, you don't know if you were from Germany or from whatever it was, and even that history has been washed. Or you're African, Black American, right, and your history has been washed. Or you're an immigrant, and your history. So
yeah,
what some of the terms that you shared, I just want to like give a little bit of a sense. So you're talking about guilds. What you're saying that talking about is that before the 18th century, around the world, right, instead of monopolies and corporations, which we all know what those are now, right?
exactly.
Everything was basically cooperatively owned, right? So we're talking about the Silk Road civilizations from Andalusia, which is where Shaykh Umar's ancestors are from, all the way to where your ancestors are from, Hindustan and China, right? All
Uh,
across this land, basically all, we're talking from China to Spain, y'all.
yeah,
This
the
was
Silk
all,
Route
yeah,
between the
this was,
continents.
exactly. This was all a land where 90%, up to 90, 80 to 90% of people for 1,000 years or more were entrepreneurs. And the only other small percentage of them that were not entrepreneurs, that were employees, were apprentices. This is what guilds are. Guilds are
Or service
cooperatives
providers.
or service
Yeah,
providers. All right, exactly. So everyone is basically an owner of their own thing. We're talking about a situation in which there was no interest based, or very, very limited, and it was like always hidden, and it was basically illegal, right? So all of the loan lending was done with no interest, right? I want to give another example is right now the house that I live in, I rent, I don't own it, right? But I live in this house, and this house on the market is $1 million, right? And by the way, that's
mm,
now cheap in America, right? This is like
mm,
the cost of houses has become something unbelievable. When I did the research to see that if we had if this house was built by guilds, so there was no middleman on the construction, all of the materials were created by guilds, so there was no middleman and no business loans and interest paid on the materials, and then
mm.
there was no mortgage paid, and basically all of the usury was extracted, and it was built in the muamalat. This house would be worth $250,000.
Wow.
So that's not only just one fourth, but if I wanted to buy this house with the current interest rates, I would pay $1 million for the house, and then at 6% interest, which sounds so small. Oh, just 6%. Over 30 years is another 1.5 million.
Oh, goodness.
So I would pay $2.5 million. This is what is being asked of a millennial, of someone of my generation who
Yeah,
wants to have a 3 bedroom house for a family, for me, my wife, and some kids, right? If I want to have a house in a safe neighborhood, right, I would need to pay $2.5 million for something that's worth
exactly.
250,000, 10 times.
Oof.
10 times.
I
Right?
mean,
So I'm paying,
what would be worse exploitation than this?
not to mention that the money is being inflated, etc. So we're talking about a system that we're gonna, hopefully be sharing with people through this podcast, where your house costs 10% of what you paid for it, your
Mm,
groceries cost 20% of what you pay for it, right? Your farmer is making all of that. Your farmer is not making less though. Your farmer is making more, right? The farmer is making more money.
yeah.
The builder is making more money, right? So we're earning
Mm,
more, and all we have to do is remove these extractive people who are then using all this money to control our politics and mess up our economies and make us fight over all of these personal issues, right? And so I'm just so excited that between you and
I
Sheikh
mean,
Omar,
the thing that I want to say to you
yes,
is capitalism going to fall very soon?
it's inevitable.
Because it's
It's
become
always
too
falling.
big to
Yeah.
survive. And
Mhm.
is the real economy, the trading economy, the real economy is coming back? Oh, yes. Is it
Yes.
doable? Yes, it will naturally happen. The world is ready for it. The black spell, the American dream, the prosperity, the whole facade of happiness and money is success and money is happiness,
Let's
that's
go.
all breaking down on its own.
We
The
literally
world
had a
is
market crash
ready for
yesterday.
it. It's going to
Yeah.
happen. We are just few steps away from it.
Yeah.
That's what I feel.
I believe it. And I'm so grateful that I get to interview you, interview Sheikh, be a platform to just share what's being done and this beautiful possibility and seed that's being planted, because it's really going to change the world. I'm 100% positive of that. So, Dr.
You
Humaira,
are
thank
the
you.
torchbearer, your
Mm,
generation, people like
inshallah.
you are not buying into the system, Mazin.
Mm,
They
I'm
are
trying.
not able to fool your
Yeah.
generation the
Hmm.
way they fool because they're too exposed.
It's
So
true. This
your
is absolutely
generation
true.
is going to be so pivotal in changing the system, inshallah.
You heard that, y'all? So please, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and in the future episodes, people like Dr. Humaira and Sheikh Umar, who you've heard about, are going to be coming back to actually teach us how. Like, let us actually talk. We want to talk about what are the steps, what can we do, how can we start to apply this ancient ancestral tradition that is. Again, I want to tell you that I've done the research. It is in ancient Asian cultures, and ancient Hindustani cultures, ancient African cultures, ancient indigenous American cultures, ancient European cultures. This is our human birthright. This is how we organize as a civilization until, right, this experiment, and let's call it an experiment that occurred. We call it the Enlightenment, but it was spread by colonization. So we got to kind of question what is really going on here until that became forced upon the world, and look at where we've ended up. So we have a lot of hope and a lot of wisdom to be sharing on this podcast, but that's for the future. For now, I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Humaira. Just deep bow of respect and gratitude. I'm so
And
happy to have had you on this episode, and inshallah, we're going to have you again soon. And is there anything you would like to share with the listeners as a final closing?
well, I just want to say that um, darkness has no force.
Mm,
Darkness is absence of light, and light belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And man is not a thing. We are the locus of the manifestation of Allah's light, the divine light. We come from His breath. So I don't want anybody from your generation to think less of them. You have force and power and luminosity that you can't even imagine. The changing of the world is on your tips. You're so empowered only if you learn to look at yourself.
mm,
And the economy is just one aspect. Alhamdulillah.
alhamdulillah. All praise to Allah. All praise to the One. Thank you so much, Dr. Humaira. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day or evening for you. It's morning for me. And I'm very looking forward to having you back on again soon, inshallah. Take care.